Hey, hello PhD listeners. Happy holiday season. This week on the show, Dan and I wanted to share a really great episode from almost 5 years ago, January 2016, featuring an interview with Dr. Natasha Snider, a faculty member who runs her own lab at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. A couple of really great nuggets from this interview that I think are especially important are the notion that prioritizing mentorship when choosing a lab or research environment can be critical for your own success down the road. I know that's something that we have mentioned many times on the show, and Dr. Snider here does a great job of talking about how that was really important in her own career progression. If you put yourself in positions where you're likely to get great mentorship, good things are going to happen. Also, she shared that it's okay to think about and pursue multiple different career paths at the same time and see which doors open for you. I think sometimes we have this idea that we have to choose one true path to be happy, but in reality, there can be several solid options, and it's okay to look behind multiple doors. One thing that's really cool recently is that Dr. Snider was recognized with a mentoring award after being nominated by some of her trainees. So it's great to see that she's paying forward this great mentoring that she received that had a big impact on her career. Anyhow, we hope you enjoy this great conversation with Dr. Snider and this blast from the past episode from 2016. Also, I wanted to thank our friends from Promega for their continued support of the show. If you need help choosing the best assay to get the answers you're looking for, want to help ensuring a perfect PCR every time, or you just want to browse specially curated content to help with your graduate training, check out the Promega Student Resource Center at promega.com/HelloPhD. And now, on with the show.
This episode of Hello PhD is sponsored by Promega and listeners like you. Thanks for your support.
So I know about beers, but I do not like beers. I've tried it. I don't like it.
I also love Michiganders. I love that people in Michigan call themselves that.
Yeah, it reminds me of salamanders.
Yeah, except more goose-like. Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. This week on the show, we get career advice from a new faculty hire and learn how she landed such a competitive gig. Stay with us.
And we're back. This is Hello PhD, episode 29. I'm Joshua Hall.
And I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab. Greetings from frigid North Carolina.
Yeah, finally it got cold.
Yes, winter has arrived at last. I think, I don't know if it got above freezing today, Dan.
I know it. We're going to have to basically shut down the entire state.
That's right. They're calling for snow, so I went ahead and bought 5 loaves of bread and 3 gallons of milk.
Yeah, and then you can make some soggy bread. I never understood that. For those of you who do not live in the not quite south, the moment there's a threat of any kind of weather whatsoever, there's a snowflake about to fly, everybody goes and buys bread and milk, and I have no idea what recipes you can make with bread and milk.
You know, every year, Dan, I listen to the ridicule of transplants from the Northeast complain about how everything shuts down with even the threat of snow here. But I would argue that's a feature of the South. I kind of like that, an inch of snow falls and we're all like, you know what? Let's just take a day.
No, we're done. Staying home.
Stay home. Kick back.
Eat some soggy bread. Delicious.
Well, Dan, in honor of our first winter weather, I have a special beer for us today, Dan. This is the Full Steam Brewery right here in Durham, North Carolina. First Frost.
Oh, perfect timing.
Yep.
This may be the first frost. Global warming.
Well, this is a beer that they only put out in the winter, and that's because this is made predominantly from persimmons.
The fruit?
The fruit, yeah.
Wow.
So this is the 2015 foraged persimmon ale. So this is pretty cool. It says it's an ale brewed with foraged persimmon. So what Full Steam does is they put out a call. They've got a network of people who go around and just pick up these fruits.
Their persimmon network?
Their persimmon network.
I need to get those people on the line.
That's right. And people these persimmon trees just grow random places around North Carolina, and often, persimmons are not necessarily a cash crop. So people just bring in their buckets of persimmons, and Full Steam makes beer out of them.
I don't know a lot about persimmons, but I am anxious to try the beer here.
Yeah, well, one thing that's cool about persimmons, I guess it's not a fruit that's very tasty for most of the year, but after the first frost, they become a very sweet fruit that is often referred to as the fruit of the gods.
Wow, you'd think more people would want to grow it.
You
wouldn't have to forage it from somewhere.
Well, before you drink too much of this beer, Dan, I should tell you this is a 10% alcohol content.
And I will be sleeping on the studio floor tonight.
What do you think?
It's a little bit. It's like a Belgian. Is that the intention?
I'm not sure, but it definitely gives off some high gravity vibes.
Yes, it does. But not a bad flavor, I wouldn't say.
No, not a bad beer.
If you like Belgian beers, you will probably like this one. I feel like it's probably got some candy sugar in it. Or do you think the persimmons actually contribute that much?
I think it's
sugar?
I think it's just the persimmons. I know when you order this at Full Steam, they serve it in a small glass, but we each have a full pint.
Yeah, which we will probably not be finishing.
So the etymology might get interesting this week.
Yep, it'll be mostly slurred, so stay tuned.
Dan, you got some feedback on last week's beer.
I did. We had such a hard time with the YPSILANTI name.
Yeah, our beer last week came from
that place.
What I pronounced as Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Ypsilanti.
I was wrong.
We put out a call for somebody to please correct us. We do care about the words we use. So I got an email this week. It said, "Hey guys, thanks so much. We listened to your last episode, specifically about the brewer from Ypsilanti, Michigan, pronounced Ypsilanti. It's no bother, though. Everyone pronounces it incorrectly, even Michiganders. If you get over near us, we'd love to treat you to a pint or two. We really love the show. Thanks again for this." So 2 things, Ypsilanti, and 2, we got to get to Michigan. Somebody offered to buy us beer.
That's right. Can we wait until spring?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. I also love Michiganders. I love that people in Michigan call themselves that.
Yeah, it reminds me of salamanders.
Yeah, except more goose-like.
We will solve this mystery. Dan, I'm pretty excited about what we're doing today.
What are we doing today?
Well, I realized we spend a lot of time on the show talking about other careers outside of the academic track.
We sometimes call them alternative, and then you cringe, and then we correct ourselves.
Yes, because as we know, statistically speaking, most PhDs do things other than faculty positions.
So today, you want to actually talk about the alternative career.
We're going to talk about the real alternate career today, and that is
Wow.
the tenure track faculty position. Because what I didn't want, Dan, is we had a great episode talking to Dara last week about tips for stepping off of the tenure track. But what I didn't want to do was give the impression that we were some trainees going into tenure track faculty jobs, because that is not at all the case.
Very far from the case. The reality is we would love it if everybody wanted to do that and everybody got to do it. We are recognizing that not everybody wants to do it and not everybody gets to do it. But yeah, I love if really good people want that job and it's the right fit for them. That's awesome.
Yeah, and all of those things we talk about, finding the right job where it doesn't feel like work and you feel like you're best suited for it. For some people, that is a tenure track faculty job at a research institution.
Well, and I think now you've done an interview today, and I think we're going to hear something probably along those lines.
That's what we're going to do, Dan. So what I did was I interviewed Natasha Snider, and so Natasha just finished her first year as a tenure track faculty member at UNC Chapel Hill.
That's awesome. So she probably is not so far into it that she's forgotten all the details of her graduate school career and postdoc career and all of those different things. I mean, I think after you're out of it long enough, it sort of blends together and you forget the details. But she's probably new enough, she remembers.
Yeah, that was my thought. I thought she could really give us an interesting perspective on what it's like to be a brand new tenure track faculty member and could really provide some interesting perspective to our listeners, because I know we have some listeners out there who their goal is to be a tenure track faculty member. And so this is for you this week.
Yeah. And if you do not want to be a tenure track faculty, will probably surprise even you.
Absolutely. Well, let's listen to it.
My name is Natasha Snider, and I'm an assistant professor of cell biology and physiology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill.
I guess first question is, what led you to pursue science as a career? And along those lines, how did you first get involved in research?
So I grew up in Eastern Europe, in Macedonia, and so it was there weren't a lot of other types of science opportunities. Math was it, and so I thought for sure I was going to pursue something in math related. Then when I was a sophomore in high school, I came to do a high school exchange to the U.S. and I was in Michigan. I just liked it and ended up staying for college there. And so when I got to Michigan State, I said, okay, well, I like math, so I'm going to study engineering. And somehow at that time, I thought it would be really cool to work for a drug company and make drugs. And I thought chemical engineering was the way that it was going to get me. But then I realized there were all of these other science career fields, and I found that I liked biochemistry a lot more. So it wasn't really until my junior year, or after my junior year at Michigan State, that I started working in a life science lab. And I was just the undergrad helper, doing dishes. One of the senior lab techs took me under his wing and showed me what a lab is all about. So it was in the pharmacology and toxicology department at Michigan State University. But even after I graduated, I was kind of debating whether grad school was for me, because this research thing was new for me. I got into the game kind of late. And so then I decided to take a couple of years. I worked as a research tech, again in a pharmacology lab. And I loved it, and the PI was so great. He let me take graduate courses while I was working. So then, from then it was, yes, I liked pharmacology and I was going to get a PhD, and that's the way I was going to go work for a drug company. I was geographically restricted because I got married around that time and my husband had a steady job in Michigan, so I went from Michigan State to the University of Michigan to pursue my PhD.
So what was grad school like for you?
Grad school was awesome. I kind of feel bad when sometimes people struggle, and I think a lot of why my experience was so great for me was my mentor. His name is Paul Hollenberg. He's more senior faculty at the University of Michigan, but he studies drug metabolizing enzymes. And so I picked his lab primarily based on him just being a fantastic person, and he had a record of training people who had gone to, industry, government, academia. So I knew I was in good hands. But what was so awesome about Paul was that he let me have an independent project that was not part of his R01 grant. That was something that I was excited about. Owning that project really just made it super fun for me.
So how about your postdoc?
My postdoc was fantastic. So I feel bad because, I don't have, sometimes people have a bad example that they can kind of learn from, but I've only had really fantastic mentors. And at my postdoc I did at Michigan. So my husband does these things to me. The first time it was his job, so we couldn't move out of Michigan. Then he was in law school at the time that I finished grad school. So I had to stay in Michigan for a postdoc, and I liked the University of Michigan. But again, it was really that connection that I had with my advisor that kind of drew me to the lab. My mentor and I really aligned in terms of what we deemed important, productivity and just getting projects done. And when I went into my postdoc, I already knew what kind of fellowships I wanted to apply for, and he was all for supporting. The postdoc was even better than the PhD in terms of just my ability to produce and kind of get to the next level.
You said you had 2 really great mentor experiences, or really 3 great mentor experiences if you count your technician work too. Do you think you were just lucky, or are there certain things you looked for when choosing mentors?
Yeah, so part of it is, I feel definitely blessed to have been, to have had the chance to meet these people, but part of it too is looking at the overall character of the person and what can you learn from them, because your mentor is not just somebody that's going to teach you about that area of science. They're going to teach you a lot more. They're going to teach you how to deal with people. They're going to teach you about how to mentor people. So, these 2 men were just, they were great at it, and I could see that, and they had a track record to prove. I think part of it is being blessed, but part of it is kind of being able to judge a person. And I was never going to settle for one of those labs where the person is just a brilliant scientist, but he or she yells at their people all the time, or you have to sleep in the lab. So that I just knew that kind of environment wasn't.
So how did you decipher that? How did you know those environments weren't like that? What types of, homework or detective work did you do when you were choosing either your graduate or postdoc lab?
I did rotate before my home PhD lab. I did rotate in a lab that a very brilliant scientist, and it's not that he was mean or anything, but I could see the people were always on edge, working around the clock and sort of just not having a lot of independence and just being told what to do. So I didn't like that, even though I was offered a position to stay in the lab.
What about your postdoc? Because that's a little trickier to do. I guess you go on postdoc interviews.
Yeah.
Was that really the time? Did you go on multiple postdoc interviews, or
so
how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, because I was restricted staying in Michigan, I think I talked to maybe 4 people that I was seriously interested in. One person was one of the, kind of brilliant scientists that you're going to get these hot papers, but he one of the first things he said was that he doesn't yell at his people as much as he used to. So after that point, I sort of I sat through the interview, but, I knew that wasn't it. And then another interview, they try to put on a good show, but I could tell the advisor was very hands-off and just kind of letting other junior faculty in the lab kind of take care of the postdocs or mentor them. So I didn't like that either. And the mentor that I chose, it just happened very spontaneously, where I just happened to see an ad for the position, and it was about intermediate filaments, which I knew nothing about, but it was very close, and I said, okay, why not go talk to him? The same day that I emailed him, I went to talk to him. It was very casual. So I just felt the connection. I could tell that this person really cared deeply about his trainees, because he was kind of going through what I like to do, and just kind of, even at one point kind of discouraging me from doing a postdoc, because he was asking me what I wanted to do, and I've always been interested in translational research, and so he was wondering if maybe medical school would be a good thing, and but I sort of like that kind of being comfortable around somebody and telling them.
So Dan, I want to jump in here really quick. First of all, I was definitely looking for challenges, and grad school was great. Postdoc was great.
Grad school was so easy for me. Yeah, but I mean, what is really unique, I think, in this situation, and what I haven't heard a lot of other people say, is she was looking for mentors, not for labs. It feels like a very different approach.
Yeah, and I think, Dan, you've heard me say that before, and at times I have thought that to be a controversial...
I don't always listen to you, but yeah.
That's true.
Good advice now.
I've thought that to be a controversial viewpoint. I've often advised students to pay more attention to a training environment that's a good fit for them than specific science that they think is cool. I think ideally the best of both worlds is great, but that seems to be what Natasha has done, and part of the reason she had such a rich training time was that she really was thoughtful about where the mentorship seemed strong.
Go back and re-listen. She does point out a handful of red flags. So do the people seem on edge? I know that's a little bit tough to read sometimes. She talks about the PI being hands-off, and maybe that's something you don't want. She talks about the person saying, "Oh, I don't yell at them anymore." So like this level of aggression, there are probably some clues for you if you're willing to look for them.
Yeah, and I think if there's a take-home from this, it's make sure you are looking for them. So a lot of times, I think during a rotation situation in graduate school or during a postdoc interview, you can become so focused on the science and the projects, and there's nothing wrong with that. That certainly is an important part of the experience. But don't do that exclusively where you are ignoring the mannerisms or the general happiness of the people around you.
Yeah, and don't get into the trap where you're like, well, he probably was just joking when he screamed at everybody. Like, no, that's not an appropriate way to deal with human adults on any level.
And it can be, typically labs are on their best behavior when someone's there interviewing. But, I think it can be very important to do that research if you can, to really ask, probing questions when you're on your interview or in your rotation of the people in your lab, and, ask them what their experience has been. And, I think you could think of ways to get at some of that information.
Sounds good. Well, let's get back to it.
So at the time that you transitioned into your postdoc, what were your career goals at that time? Because I know initially going into graduate school, you said you were interested in drug development and more industry type careers.
So when I first met with my postdoc advisor, he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, well, one day I want to have a nonprofit drug company, because at the time there was one. And I think they still sort of exist in some form, but not, academia wasn't kind of on my radar. I thought I did want to work for a drug company, but maybe there were other areas of drug development that I could look into. But basically I concluded that a postdoc is just going to be my time to figure things out. And during my postdoc, I got interested in other things. For example, at one point I thought maybe I would like to work for the FDA. I even took a summer course on pharmacoepidemiology. And then I decided it probably wasn't for me. But it was just, I went through these phases of like, well, what would I like to do? And academia was always there, but it was never like, I only want to be a professor. I don't want to look at anything else. Now, with that said, I was planning my career structure as though I was going to be in academia in terms of publishing and getting grants and things like that. Because even if you don't think you want to go into academia, you should be doing those things because it shows productivity. It shows that you can, work independently, get your own funding. So I always did things, planning for an academic route, but explored these other opportunities. I interviewed for a medical writing position. I interviewed for Big Pharma. So even after my graduate school, I also did those types of interviews.
So when then did you decide to pursue a faculty job? Obviously you are a faculty member now. So when did you make that decision to go that route?
It was after I visited UNC. Because even when I was on the job market, I was still interviewing at pharma, and I was interviewing at universities. So it was that feeling you get, like, I want to be at this place, I want to live in this town, and I want to be surrounded by these types of colleagues, and I can see that I can grow my research program here into something that I would be really happy with. So it was that finding that match.
So you simultaneously were interviewing for faculty, industry. Academic jobs, and industry jobs.
Yeah, in fact, my top two choices were UNC and an industry position. And it was like I always lean toward industry. I think it's so amazing that you can put in a chemical in a person and reprogram what their cells are doing with a small little chemical. And so I thought, and I actually know a lot of brilliant scientists who work in industry. So I never had that bias that some people in academia have. Like if you go to industry, you're a sellout, you just want to go make the big bucks, and you kind of lose some of your identity and you're not allowed to work on what you want to work on. I think industry is a great place for somebody with a scientific training. And, just like in academia, there are environments that are better suited for some people. Some people might like it in biotech more than big pharma. But I think as graduate students, students should look into all of these opportunities and not bias themselves in any way based on what they hear. They should find out first person from people who are in those positions. Mm-hmm. And my graduate training department actually did a really good job of this, where we had these weekly seminars, and they invited people from government, people from industry and academia. So as students, we always had the opportunity to go have lunch with the speaker on the day that they presented their seminar. And what always surprised me is that there was always a group of three of us that were always there at these lunches, and other students wouldn't. I just don't know why they never showed up. But I made so many connections that way. And it was never like a forced sort of like awkward networking kind of a thing. It was just very natural. These career things start.
Wow. If you could write a book on the right way to do career development, I think all of her examples would be in there. She was going to the lunch meeting to meet these industry experts, industry and scientific experts from across the field, and nobody else was going. And she said, I'm making these great contacts. She got an idea about what she might want to do, and she did a summer program in it to find out if it's what she wanted to do. And I think the great thing about that is she can come to this crossroads where she's saying, okay, industry or academia, and I've got these two jobs, but she's got the experience to go back and say, I've eliminated all these other possibilities. I don't have to second guess the fact that these are my two options and I just have to compare these two. I think she did everything right.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, she's personifying some of the advice that we've given several times, and that is really take advantage of opportunities that exist within your environment. You know, her graduate university had this weekly lunch series or whatever where they brought in scientists in different fields, and she was there. She made the time to go every week. I'm sure she was busy. I'm sure she had experiments to do, but took the time to do that, and through that process that was right there in front of her, it was very little effort other than just showing up. She made some great connections.
Yeah, each one individually, you're going to feel like, oh, this was a waste of my time. Why did I do this? Every once in a while, you'll have one that you're like, wow, that was kind of cool. It still may not lead to anything. But over the course of years, you have really built this great group of contacts that you don't even know how you're going to call on them or get back in touch again.
Yeah, and not to mention, Dan, I mean, I used to take advantage of things similar to this in graduate school. But even if you're not specifically interested in the topic at hand, you start to build this muscle where you become more comfortable at having conversations, meeting, and talking with individuals you don't know about their career. And those are skills that are actually very useful later on. The more comfortable you are and confident you are to go and have those conversations, the better.
It'll really help you do interviews when you have a podcast someday.
That's right.
Is that right? Now, this is another point she brought up that I think is really kind of wild. She wanted to do industry and a faculty position. That doesn't seem normal.
Yeah. Of all the things in my day job, but then also in doing this podcast, we think a lot about careers that PhDs can do and want to do. And I realized I have such a tendency to, and I think a lot of us do in the career realm, to put people in boxes. You know, we think about, all right, we've got the industry people, and we've got the teaching people, and then we've got the faculty directed people.
You get in your faculty box and you stay there.
Yeah, we think about, well, this is for you, and this is for you, and this is for you. But she is a good example of someone who, it's not that cut and dry. You know, really up until the moment at the university she ended up in, she was also entertaining industry jobs, and that probably, you know, she indicated several times throughout our talk today that industry was always kind of her first goal. And it wasn't until she was actually on the job market that she decided to take a faculty.
I think we do have this notion that you're in the industry box or you're in the faculty box. And I would love to hear from people who said, yeah, I would have done either. Just this is the opportunity that came along. So please write to us.
Well, I think on one level, Dan, it makes sense. When you're actually on the job market or thinking about your career prospects, you don't know what the future holds. You don't know what's out there, what opportunities are going to be available. And so it actually, I think, makes a lot of sense to have diverse interests and really cast your net more widely, because you know you don't know what's going to hit.
Unless you're on the psychic career path, and then you kind of do.
Okay, so there are significantly more PhDs being produced than there are faculty jobs, as I'm sure you're aware. What do you think made you stand out?
Well, so one thing, you know, when search committees go through the piles of applications, and I actually am on a search committee now, so it's kind of fun to see things from the other side, is, you know, you have to have shown productivity. You have to have published during your graduate training, during your postdoctoral training. You have to have, I mean, it's almost a requirement that you have some kind of funding of your own. So I think it was just my track record. That was one of the things that caught the eye of the search committee probably. Another thing, my postdoctoral advisor sent personal emails to all the chairs of the departments where I applied, even people that he didn't know, and including here. And I also had met some of the faculty from here at a meeting, so I made sort of established personal connections. So sometimes having, you know, knowing somebody is also, you know, it gives you an opportunity to kind of get to know the culture of the institution from, you know, more of a personal perspective, but also it lets them get to know you on a more informal level. And so when I came for my interview at UNC, I was really just having fun, and I enjoyed meeting everybody, and I enjoyed giving my seminar and my chalk talk. So everything just kind of went very smoothly, which wasn't the case with some of the other interviews I had. And I think the main issue when things, you know, when people are going on these interviews and if they don't go well, I think you can't beat yourself up. Sometimes it's just a fit, and you can tell when it's forced. And
So you've been a faculty member now for
a year.
Yeah, over a year now?
A year and a few days.
Great. Happy 1 year faculty anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what the last year has been like. What's been harder than you thought it would be?
Harder than I thought. People. Hiring people and spending time with them. When you're a postdoc, you're taking care of your project and you're just in the zone, just producing data and writing, and you the tendency is that you want to keep doing that. Like you have all these ideas and somebody has to do them, but you have to invest the time in helping people get first to your level of excitement, if that's even possible, and then get them trained and set up to do it. And so I'm a very impatient person, and I'm trying to work on that, but sometimes it's just waiting for people to get to that level so that it doesn't seem like I'm just jumping ahead too much. Mm-hmm. I think another hard thing is you have so many ideas, and in the very beginning, like the first few months, you think they're all possible, and it's just a matter of getting this kit and that kit and these drugs, and it's not like that. It just takes, and you can't work like a postdoc anymore because you have other responsibilities. So it's been a little bit humbling to kind of have to step back and say, okay, well, it's not going to move as fast as I would like it to move, but.
So what's your typical week like?
I don't know if there's a typical. We have our Monday lab meeting, and right after that we have seminars. So Mondays are kind of shot with sitting around meeting and talking about science. I try to I'm still doing experiments, so I usually get my stuff actually started over the weekend, and so that during my downtime I can help and work with people. A lot of the last few months has been writing grants, and that's going to continue. But in addition, now we have to start writing papers. So more and more, I have to start working with my trainees and sort of putting abstracts for meetings together. So a lot of it is either going to the lab and doing my experiments, or helping somebody with an experiment, or sitting at my computer, either here or at home. I can write better at home.
I understand that. What advice would you have for anyone listening who is a grad student or postdoc who wants to be a faculty member someday? What general advice would you give to that person?
Well, I mean, obviously you have to work really hard, and you always have to be. I mean, think about it. Think about statistically your chances of acquiring a faculty position, and then think about all the people that you have to be ahead of to get there, right? So when you get into grad school, you have to stack yourself against the best people in your class. Don't just pass your classes, and don't just get one paper because that's the requirement to finish. Go above and beyond, and put yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable. Like I didn't like giving talks at the beginning, and I would always sign up to give a talk because I knew it. Another thing, it's not just enough to work hard and write papers and apply for grants. You have to talk to people. Like you have to have a personality where you're face to face with people and you're reaching. Don't just hide in lab and just get out and talk to people.
Yeah, one thing I always say is there's this misconception by people outside of science that scientists are these very introverted, nose down people sitting by themselves in rooms, but science is very much a team sport.
It is, and I think the people who do best, they're not necessarily the brightest in terms of how smart they are, how much they've read. It's having the whole package and kind of balancing, the social and the people aspect and your science. And you have to be able to sell your science, and you have to know how to communicate. And you can't just say, oh, I don't like writing and I'm a bad writer, and resign to that. Like, you just have the communication aspect is absolutely essential. If a faculty position is really what you want to pursue, then you have to work hard and you have to be ahead of the game. Like, you cannot play catch up later on. And so grad school and the early years of your postdoc is the time to really shine and prove yourself. And you really should be applying for career fellowships in your second and definitely by your third year of your postdoc. Don't wait when it's 4 years, and then you're, for example, and again, a lot of it is whose lab you're in. So I'm not going to downplay the fact that I had a really good mentoring relationship with my advisor, and he was very cognizant of everything that goes into promoting a postdoc's career. But I applied for my career development early part of the second year of my postdoc. And, a lot of postdocs have this misconception that you have to have all these papers before you apply for a grant, and you don't. I mean, you just have to have a very supportive mentor, a mentoring team, and good ideas. And you have to be. I don't even know how many iterations of my grant I went through with my advisor. And the first thing I put together, I thought it was the best thing on the face of the earth, and he shot it down, and I was just so mad. But then I got over it. Your mentor really, you have to trust. If it's a really good mentor, you really have to put your trust in them and then work hard to kind of.
So Dan, I just have several reactions talking to Natasha today. One is, I think it will be easy for a lot of our listeners who are really struggling through graduate school and really struggling with whether or not they want to continue on the academic path to hear Natasha's story and be really frustrated and maybe feel like they are a failure.
Yeah, if you don't float through every possible challenge you face, then I guess it's not for you. That's the take.
But I think, and this is, I was actually really glad we did this interview today, and it was very illuminating for me and nailed home a certain point, and that is, this is a good way to figure out if being a faculty member is what you want to do, because the thing we talk about all the time is what you should strive for, and what we want all of you to strive for is to find that career, find that position where work doesn't deplete you, but actually fills you, and you can put all of yourself into it. And at the end of the day, you feel energized, you feel excited to go that extra mile and do what you need to do. You want to find work that feels like a natural extension of yourself. And talking to Natasha today, it was very apparent to me that running a research lab is that for her.
It's like flying for her. And I'm sure that she had experiments not work in her career, and I'm sure that she had mean people in her lab. I'm sure she faced all the things that we talk about, but because she was so in love with the research, it didn't feel like, oh, I'm never going to get through this, and I hate it, and I really wish I hadn't gotten started. It was like, okay, this is hard now. How can I figure it out? And she faced the same challenges, but it was energizing to her, and it made her want to push harder. And I don't think everybody has that reaction, but it's a really good indicator that she's doing the right thing.
Yeah, and along those lines, if you're out there and you feel that way about research, there's a lot of talk about, the state of funding and about how there's so few faculty jobs and how it's really impossible to pursue that path anymore. But if you're like Natasha, if you're in graduate school, you're in your postdoc, and you love going to lab every day, and you lay awake at night thinking about your project and the next grant you want to write and your career in that way, don't listen to that. Like, that is exactly what you need to be doing. You need to stay on this path, and this is the job that's meant for you. So don't be discouraged by some of this talk if you are like her and, being in lab is what really excites you.
This alternate career is for you.
That's right.
Well, I have an alternate etymology puzzle for you, sir.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Spring it on me. I've been thinking a lot about this, the one from last week.
This one's real tough. The clue was these horns, because you had an etymological insight a few weeks ago, and I think we should listen to it. Kerato in the Greek means horn. So, real simple one. The word horn is right in there. That was a direct translation of kerato and keratin.
Is that where we get carats, like for diamonds?
It's a good question. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
A horn of diamonds. Okay, so for those of you who didn't happen to hear that episode, please go back and listen. But the clue was about keratin, which comes from the Greek keratos, which is horn. And you said, does that have anything to do with carats, like gems and gold? And I thought to myself, there's no way this has anything to do with carats. You had too much whatever beer we were drinking that week. But I looked it up because I said I would, and it totally has everything to do with gems and gold and carats.
Well, I mean, clearly it did, Dan. I mean, I knew exactly what I was talking about in that moment.
My Greek is so well polished. But this one was really tricky. So the answer to this week's clue is actually carob. And the reason is the carob seed, which is horn-shaped, which gets its name from keratos, was used as a weight and measure for gems and gold in the, I think it was, in the Middle East. Yeah. So
Yep. Middle East. Yep.
Middle East. Yep. So the system was eventually standardized, and 1 carat was fixed to 0.2 grams. But before that, a carat was measured in the number of these little seeds that come from the carob tree.
Yeah, I think it was 72 seeds.
Probably like 72. So yeah.
Are we talking standard carob? Or...
You probably invented this unit of measure back in the day, right?
I actually went in and updated the Wikipedia page myself over the last few weeks.
I appreciate that. Well, I got a kick out of it, so thank you for having that insight and sending me on that chase.
Well, I'm walking a little extra tall right now.
Yeah. I will give you the next clue, and I've tried to make it a little easier. So the clue for this week is a doctor with this device doesn't need X-ray vision to look into your chest. I'll read it one more time. A doctor with this device doesn't need X-ray vision to look into your chest. Remember, I'm looking for a scientific word described by the clue. Once you get it, you'll find that the literal meaning of that science word is a phrase in the clue itself. If you think you know the answer, email it to puzzle@hellophd.com, and I will randomly select a winner from all the correct responses and send the lucky puzzler an Amazon gift card.
And you really do that.
I sure do. I think most people buy 24 carob gold.
But
yeah. So on that note, how can people get in touch with us, Josh?
Well, Dan, if you have a question that you'd like for us to talk about on the show, or if you have some feedback on a past episode, you can shoot us an email, podcast@hellophd.com. We always love to see your tweets. We are at HelloPhD on Twitter, or you can contact us on the Facebook page.
Right, and we got to cut this short because I'm part of a persimmon foraging group. I really need to get out of here.
Well, I think you'll be staggering after slamming down that pint of 10%.
Yeah, you noticed that the glass is still fairly full, right?